Hi, my name is Katie LaShawn, and I'm here with my colleague, Sarah Butch.
Hi.
Today, we're going to be speaking about closing the gap on learning loss for English learners. And we're just really excited to dive into this topic with you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Excellent. So let us begin in prayer as we celebrate this Easter season. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Loving God, thank you for the opportunity to encounter you and others. Animate my work that I may embrace my students and their families who so beautifully reflect the diverse and universal church. Inspire my efforts to educate the whole child, celebrating the cultures and languages that enrich our school. Bless my efforts to empower children and families to recognize and employ their own unique gifts and talents to renew our community in your image. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Welcome. So I just want to help frame where we are coming from here at ENL from the University of Notre Dame. So the English as a New Language program believes that our Catholic schools are enriched and graced by our culturally and linguistically diverse students. And so because of this belief, then that leads itself directly into our mission, which is to cultivate teacher leaders to ensure that our English learning children are thriving in our Catholic schools, not just surviving in our Catholic schools. And so as part of this presentation comes out of this process of providing professional development for teachers, as well as offering online modules and Zoom calls where we are able to partner with schools and learn more from them as they're working right in the front line, you could say, with our students and their fabulous gifts and talents, and then inviting them here to the university to participate in deepening their expertise through the Hernandez Fellows Program if they are interested in being an in-house expert for their school. And so our presentation today just really is focused on closing this gap, and we are so excited to share these ideas with you. And so as you're getting ready to gather your materials, we want to first visit the ACE ND-EDU ENL website. So let me show you where you can find that. And so when you type in that URL, you will come to this website here. And when you scroll down, we have 4 buckets, and the one you're going to want to click on is our innovative resources. And so when you get to this page, you're going to see a variety of resources here at the top that are also useful tools, but scroll all the way to the bottom, and then you will find our NCEA Closing the Gap webinar graphic organizer here. And so when you download it, it will look like this, a space for you to input ideas that you'll be able to use in your classroom, and then some key resources for you as you're working through those ideas that we will discuss as we go through the presentation today. So let's head back. So make sure you've got those resources ready to stop and jot.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. All right, friends, now that you have your graphic organizer in hand, maybe your coffee, your cafecito like I do, we're really going to dive into 3 things together today. So by the end of our presentation, we want you to be able to put a big check mark next to these 3 items. Number 1, talking about identifying your multilingual learners. And then we're going to talk about articulating the learning gap experienced by some English learners during COVID. And we'll specify some of those pieces. And then we want you to be able to integrate 5 strategies for strengthening instruction in the 4 domains of language. So as we came with this presentation, we were really thinking about kind of how to approach this instructionally. What are 5 try now strategies? And so we really settled on 1 from each of the 4 domains of language and 1 that ties it all together. All right, friends, grab your graphic organizer and here we go. The first place we wanted to start with 3 big ideas around second language acquisition. So first and foremost, your English learners are identified as a child for whom English is not the first language, or is not for children for whom a language other than English is spoken at home. This can mean so many things. Please, please, please promise us that when you're working with your English learners, that you are coming to know their rich language environments well. What language is spoken in the home? What language do the children attend Mass in? What language do the children largely hear? And what language do they produce at home? And what language do the majority of members of the family read and write in? So part of coming to know your English learners is moving beyond that general home language survey that says yes or no, a language other than English is spoken at home. We want you to move beyond that. The first step in moving beyond that is identifying what stage of language acquisition your English learners are in and at, and thinking about how you're going to move them to the next stage. So generally speaking, there are 5 stages of second language acquisition. All of these stages are very congruent with WIDA, Lost Links, your major language assessments. They're all kind of based on this general idea that there are 5 stages. The very first stage lasts 0 to 6 months, and children may have 1 to 500 words. I want you to see there that these children are able to do a lot of things, to point, act out, to match, to label, right? Next comes early production. 6 months to a year, these children have about 1,000 words. We need to give our children some real credit here. That is a lot of vocabulary in a second language. What your English learners are doing with their brains is tremendous. They are learning both language and content at the same time, and it is a process. We cannot achieve grade level fluency in a second language in 1 year, as you can see on this chart. In 1 year, your child might be at the speech emergence stage, 1 to 3 years, 3,000 words. These are what we call our obvious English learners. What I still want you to pay attention to, or what I really want you to pay attention to, are these last 2 stages, this intermediate fluency and advanced fluency. Again, this can take anywhere from 3 to 5 years, all the way to 7 to 10 years for our children to become grade level fluent in academic English. In your graphic organizer, we have the same chart produced. So what I'd love you to do here is to pause the video for just a second, take a deeper look at this chart, and maybe even jot some names down by students who are in certain stages or who you have taught in different stages. So take about 1 minute here to jot this down, and then we're going to go on to big idea number 2. Thank you.
Excellent. So then for big idea number 2, again, related to the process that second language acquisition is a process, we need to make sure that we are instructing in all 4 domains of language. So when we're looking at wanting our students to be successful in their academic language in the classroom, that involves listening skills, that involves speaking skills, reading skills, and writing skills. And so these 4 domains are integral to ensuring and helping students to move through the various stages of second language acquisition and helping them to master and grow to become proficient users of the English language and to be able to navigate the school environment and to successfully show all of the amazing things that they're able to do, not only in their home language, but then in specifically their English language.
That's absolutely right, Sarah. I think one thing I would add too is this connects to this idea of the five stages of language acquisition, and that students may actually be stronger in one domain than another domain, and that they may be at different levels. So their listening generally might be at a higher level than their ability to write. So you may see different in these 4 domains, which is how WIDA produces that school report for you anyways, is that students have varying, they're at varying stages within these 4 domains.
So thank you, Katie. And so thinking of these 4 domains, the way that we can ensure that we're helping students to build all of the skills in those 4 domains is that we need to ensure then, for big idea number 3, that all students receive comprehensible input. And so we're going to take a little field trip in time back to the lovely Stephen Krashen, and he is going to share with us an example, his key idea of comprehensible input and how it applies to language acquisition.
I'd like to take just a couple of minutes and give you some sample language lessons. I'll use a language that I'm sure you've heard before and maybe some of you speak, and you can tell me which of these 2 very brief lessons you like better. Here's lesson number 1. Wir werden jetzt anfangen, Deutsch zu lernen. Und ich möchte im Voraus sagen, dass nach meiner Meinung Deutsch ist eine sehr schöne Sprache. Und ich hoffe, dass Sie alle sehr viel Erfolg mit Deutsch haben werden. What do you think? Good lesson so far? Do you think if I kept talking to you like that, you'd pick up German? Not very likely. How about if I repeated it? Would that help? Probably not. How about if I said it louder? Would that help? Probably not. How about if I said it and you repeated it back? Again, I don't think that would help. How about if I wrote it out for you and you could see it on your television screen? That wouldn't help either. How about if I wrote it out for you and you copied it down? How about if I wrote it out for you and deleted every fifth word and you tried to guess what the word is? The truth is that none of these things help. None of these things mean anything. And I hope you can see that now. Here's lesson number 2. And for this, you have to watch me carefully. Das ist meine Hand. Verstehen Sie das? Hand? Everyone say, ja, I can hear you, even though it's a TV audience. Good. Kopf. Das ist mein Kopf. Verstehen Sie Kopf? Ja? Gut. Kopf. Here, I'll draw a picture in it. Kopf. Ist gut, ja? Schön. Das ist Mr. Spock, ja? Mr. Spock hat 2 Ohren. Ohren. Verstehen Sie Ohren? Er hat 2 Ohren. Okay, Mr. Spock. Ja? Ach, nein. Entschuldigung. Okay. Augen. Verstehen Sie Augen? Augen. Wie viele Augen? 1, 2, 3 Augen. 3 Augen. Ist das richtig? 3 Augen? Nein. Wir haben nur 3 Augen. Mund. Verstehen Sie Mund? Und hier ist eine Zigarette, ja? Nein. Zigaretten sind nicht gut. If you understood lesson number 2, not every word, but more or less, I did everything necessary to teach you German. And now I'm going to share with you the most important thing I have learned about language. Probably the best kept secret in the profession. We acquire language in one way and only one way, when we understand messages. We call this comprehensible input. We acquire language when we understand what people tell us, not how they say it, but what they say, or when we understand what we read.
Wonderful. So journeying back to present day here, I'm just reiterating then the importance of ensuring that students are able to understand what it is that we're teaching in the classroom. And we do that by incorporating those 4 domains and supporting skills and scaffolds as we bolster their skills in those 4 domains.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. I see this video often, and I'm just reminded how important it is that our students understand certainly the messages that we're giving, but that particularly for our English learners, that our lessons are super rich in visuals and in supports. And today we're going to talk about that quite a bit. Before we get to this incredible slide here with the cutest little girl I've ever seen, what I'd love for you to do is take just a moment on your graphic organizer and just jot down a few notes. How many English learners do you have in your classroom or in your school? Building off these 3 ideas, what stages are they at? How do you provide support these days in terms of the 4 domains of language? Maybe where could you improve? And then number 3, what does it mean to have comprehensible input in your lessons? So take just 1 minute for us and summarize those 3 ideas for yourself. Thank you very much. Okay, whenever you're ready to unpause us, we're going to continue here. So I just want to stop for a second. The news, Ed Week, you name it, in all of education, we've been spending a lot of time thinking about and talking about learning loss or closing the gap. And it certainly exists. And if we didn't say this from the very beginning, first and foremost, thank you for the Herculean effort that you have made to serve all of our children during this pandemic. We want to first acknowledge that you've done tremendous, tremendous work. But before we talk about learning loss and the gap, I want to change the narrative here for just a moment. And I want to talk about potential learning gains that our English learners have made. Our English learners have a true superpower of being multilingual. Simply put, their brains are doing twice as much work as those of us who are monolingual and who come at this as English speakers. These children are doing tremendous things with their brain. We could spend a lot of time talking about the hindrances to their progress during COVID, and we'll get there in our next slide. But for a moment, I want you to think about the things that were gained. It's not all lost that our children had extra time spent with their families, speaking another language. There's some real thought that these children gained, deeper home language connections, deeper connections with their culture, incredible amounts of time spent with their families. And that is not a loss. Hopefully, our students actually gained stronger literacy skills in their first language, and they just had more enrichment building their home language. Research is crystal clear that the stronger you are in your first language, the stronger you're going to be in your second language. So let's first and foremost reframe this as, what are the potential learning gains that our English learners had during this time of COVID? While we know that COVID was difficult for our students for many, many ways, it was particularly difficult for our English learners. So this is an image, I'm sure some of you have seen this from mythology. It's the Sisyphus image, where the idea of we're constantly pushing a rock up a hill, and in his case, only to have it fall back down upon him. The pandemic has exasperated a pre-existing equality crisis in education communities. Due to inequitable access to healthcare, income inequalities, disproportionate employment in high-risk essential jobs, low-income communities of color suffered the most from the health and economic impacts of the pandemic. In terms of learning statistics, English learners experienced roughly 30% of a year of typical growth during this time of COVID. A policy analysis group out of Stanford found that learning loss was more pronounced for English learners than for the general student population. Some of the reasons for this include the fact that multilingual learners across the board typically lacked access to technology, internet, and digital literacy. Language development was delayed through a lack of exposure to English, just basic time on task, as well as a lot of our e-learning initiatives, or even being back in the classroom through masking and social distancing. A lot of our lessons were just simply lacking supports and scaffolds in phonics, vocabulary development, and writing supports, which we know are needed for our English learners. Research also shows us that many of our digital lessons lack some of the same visual supports, and the general feedback, the discourse, the volleying of language that goes back and forth in an in-person classroom was just not as present for many of our students in e-learning. And then finally, classrooms that were distanced or doing things online really lacked kind of the context for language. We know that language is inherently a social endeavor. And so our English learners potentially faced a lot of these mounting disadvantages that became or could be seen as pushing a very heavy boulder up a hill. So I want you to take just a second here and jot down, what are some of the obstacles that your English learners faced during this time of COVID? Thank you very much. What I want to do now is I want to turn this image a little bit on its head. So again, I want you to focus on the learning gains that your students had potentially. And then I want you to change this narrative. So in this image, I've literally changed the boulder to a big fun ball. I'm not sure if we can change learning language into a big fun ball for our students, but that's certainly a goal. And it's not just that the ball has changed, that our lessons, our curriculum, all of that, we can certainly focus on those pieces. But my real hope is that together, and by putting several people on this, we can get that ball right up the hill and have it roll right down for our English learners. And we're going to close the gap in their instruction. And the way we're going to focus on this is through the 4 domains of language. So Sarah's going to first talk to you about, or speak to you about, how to bolster listening skills for your English learners. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. So as we dive into this domain of listening, I just want to clarify a couple pieces here in that hearing and listening are not the same thing. And so our students have had multiple opportunities, our English learners have had multiple opportunities to hear things. But the difference between hearing and listening is that listening is an active pursuit where they're building meaning and thinking and asking questions and making connections. Whereas hearing, we can hear a lot of things, but then they don't always register or have meaning. Similar to the crash-in video at the front end with the first lesson, I was hearing a lot of things, but I was not necessarily listening because I was not able to make any connections. Whereas in the second lesson that he presented with the different scaffolds, I was not only listening, I was not only hearing, but like it became listening because I could make meaning from what was taking place there. And so, as I said, our multilingual learners definitely need opportunities to build those listening skills. And as we're doing so, we want to make sure that it's an active pursuit and remembering that listening is not necessarily literacy either. And so making sure that when we're wanting to focus on a listening skill, that we're really focusing on building listening skills and maybe not trying to layer it too soon with a later domain of reading and or writing in that process and helping them to first grow in that. And so one of the key ways that we can help students with that listening, with that thinking as they're hearing information is to use think alouds. And so this wonderful video here, I'm going to share with you. This woman is going to take the opportunity to show you the key difference between what I maybe did in the classroom in the front end of my educational journey. It was a lot of modeling where I was just doing things and they could just see me doing them, and taking it up another level and helping them to grow their listening skills through think alouds.
A think aloud is different than a model. And I think elementary knocks my socks off with this. Former secondary teacher, I didn't even know about these. It wasn't until I was coaching I really appreciated the power of a think aloud. Let me explain the difference between a think aloud and a model, because for some of us, we might be thinking we're doing a think aloud, but you're doing a model. It's not enough. If I was teaching a kid how to shoot a free throw, I could just model it. Okay, yeah, you're a form. Woo, we got to work on this. Let me show you. Okay, so you get to the free throw line, and this is a free throw. Okay, so this is what you're going to do. Got it? Okay, I'm modeling it. You getting it? Got it? Good. Your turn. Okay, nothing's really going to change about his thinking or his ability to do it. Let me switch that. This is the think aloud. Okay, so we're going to learn how to shoot a free throw. So the first thing I do when I come to the line is I look down. I'm right-handed, my right foot slightly in front of my left. That's not really obvious, but that is what's happening. Here's definitely what's not obvious. I'm leaning forward. You can't see that. Let me tell you, I'm leaning forward. I'm on the balls of my feet. I'm leaning forward. Now, let me tell you where I'm looking, because you can't tell. No, I'm not looking at the rim. You look at the rim and you're going to hit the rim. You don't look at the rim. You look up and over behind the rim. That's where I'm looking. All right, so I'm leaning forward. My knees are flexed. I'm looking up and over behind the rim. Now I'm just hold the ball. You don't need to spin it. You don't need to do it. Just hold the ball. All right. Hold the ball. I'm looking up and over the rim. I'm looking up and over the rim. I'm leaning forward. Now here's what I'm saying to myself. I'm thinking up, snap. Up, snap. Up, snap. That's what I'm doing. Up, snap. Okay. Now I want you to do this. I want you to talk me through what you're thinking as you do it. That's a think aloud. Just doing one. Just showing them how to put two sentences together, how to insert a transition. How did you know which transition? How did you know we needed a transition? How did you get there? All this buzz about growth mindset, we got to replace their thoughts with the thoughts of the expert.
Beautiful. Awesome. So as she said, like you want to make sure that you're going through that thinking process with them. So providing opportunities for them to practice those listening skills with the think alouds themselves, but then also authentic opportunities, or having guest speakers come in to share, and having them other educators come in, as well as listening to real videos from around their own environment, whether it be the news, not necessarily the news reports, like weather reports might be a little more applicable, and just other opportunities for them to go through that process. And then you as the teacher helping them with that by providing how to approach when they come across words that they don't understand when they hear them, or ways in which they can make connections to what they're interacting with their content. So take a moment now and just stop and jot in the listening box, maybe how are you already bolstering the listening skill for your students? And then maybe what's something you could try tomorrow with your students to help increase their capacity to listen and to make it a more interactive process for them to understand that it's just not them sitting there absorbing information like osmosis, but they actually have to participate in the process with them.
I think.
Wonderful. All right. So I hope you had lots of ideas that you could jot in the listening section. And so that naturally lends itself then to the speaking section. And so in this, we're going to be talking about oracy, and that's where you're able to build meaning and to be able to clearly articulate your own thoughts. So after all of that listening and all of the great ideas that your students are having, many times it's difficult for them to articulate. They don't have the words necessarily or understand how to put things together to be able to express what they're learning and to demonstrate for you what they've mastered in the classroom. And so we're going to take another field trip, and the lovely Katie here is going to share with us about the importance of building literacy, or building oracy in the classroom.
Welcome back to our ENL 2-minute tips. Today, we're going to talk about oracy and how important it is to plan for oracy in the classroom. I would like to begin this tip with a scenario that you might see in a 5th grade classroom. Friends, please turn to your neighbor and talk about the layers of the earth that we've been covering in science. Immediately, you can just see the students chatting away, sharing knowledge, and reinforcing learning, right? But upon closer examination, you may begin to hear a lack of academic vocabulary being used, or you may begin to see that your emergent bilingual students are unengaged in this oracy activity. How might we structure this activity in a way that promotes strong oracy skills? First, let's define oracy. Oracy is the ability to express oneself grammatically and fluently in speech. We all know that talking is the gateway to reading and writing, and yet we do not often focus on developing strong speaking and oracy skills in our lessons, but we should. Purposeful and productive talk leads to deeper meaning. When planning for oracy activities in your classroom, please keep 2 things in mind. Number 1, oracy must be structured and it must explicitly model language. 2, oracy must be rehearsed and it must be repeated. Let's revisit our science lesson. At first, I simply asked students to talk about the layers of the earth with their neighbor. Let's try this topic again using one of my favorite oracy activities, talk tasks. Talk tasks are speaking supports that help students converse. This specific talk task includes a visual, a word bank, and model language. In my classroom, I could give this sheet to all of my students and I could say something like, friends, in science, we've been learning about the layers of the earth. Using this talk task sheet, I would like for you to converse with 3 different friends about the layers of the earth. Your sheet includes talking points, a labeled image of the earth, and a word bank. As we do this activity, remember to talk like scientists today. In this activity, partner 1 might say, I am thinking about a layer of the earth that is made up of, and it is blank state of matter. It also, this would be a great place to insert some descriptive language. Then you can ask your partner, can you guess what layer I'm thinking about? Partner 2 might say, I'm describing a different layer of the earth. This layer is made up of blank and it's blank state of matter. It also, what layer am I describing? With this talk task activity, the conversations are more targeted, they're more academic in nature, and they are reinforced with repetition, more so than had I simply asked students to share with one another. Please remember that purposeful and productive talk leads to deeper meaning. In your classrooms this week, happy talking.
Excellent. So as Katie mentioned, oracy is key to these other domains of language as well. And just to briefly mention, many times we hear our students in the hallways and on the playground and when they're speaking and they sound very proficient. And then we get to the classroom and we're not noticing maybe that same level of proficiency. And so one thing to remember is the difference between BICS, B-I-C-S, which is basic interpersonal communication skills, which are your everyday, very relaxed, I'm chatting with my friends in the hallway, versus the CALP, or the cognitive academic language proficiency, which you're looking at then. What we're testing and assessing in the classroom is that the ability to use academic language accurately. And so noticing those components, and maybe that will help calm your worries a little bit as you're going through and you're like, yes, we can support that. And there isn't like a huge discrepancy per se. It's just helping students to then, as mentioned, like that repeated exposure, repeated time to practice, and providing them the frames and the structures. And so like, as she had mentioned in the science lesson with the talk task, here's another example of a talk task in a math lesson, dealing with division. So maybe like a end of second grade, potentially beginning of third grade situation. And so here we have the visual with the items and what the students are working with, and then their nice sentence frames. And so the students can go through the varying sets of cookies and children to then practice saying like, there are 24 cookies and there are 4 children. So we know that 24 shared equally between 4 is equal to 6. So that means like each child gets 6 cookies. And so then this is then a fraction of the whole set. So it's like 1/4 of the cookie set. So my talk task maybe wasn't as articulate as your students will be, but just making sure that providing those opportunities where they can see what it is they're supposed to be using, and practicing all of the skills that you're, specifically the oracy skills that you are utilizing in the classroom, with incorporating the key vocabulary and practicing those more academic language structures with complete sentences and in the inclusion of those components. And so thinking about that discourse piece that naturally occurs with oracy. Another thing to make sure to remember is establishing expectations, ensuring that students are respecting each other's ideas and then being open to hearing somebody else's perspective, inviting students when they're in small groups to participate in the conversation by inviting them through a question or asking them their point of something, and then thinking about back to like the listening skills that they've been practicing. How can you give proof of what you've been listening to, and asking to clarify, challenge, or summarize ideas. And I know that in my classroom, when I provided sentence frames that said like, I agree with, because a lot of the students then were able to add on to whenever I would ask, like, what else is everybody thinking? Or what else would you have to share? And then they were able to be like, I really liked what Susie had to say because X, Y, and Z from the text that we were reading in class. And so just making sure to provide those opportunities and helping to structure that time and that opportunity for them, for the students to build their oracy skills. And so this naturally lends itself then to the next couple of domains. So before that, though, take a moment briefly to just stop and jot. How are you already bolstering the students' speaking skills in the classroom? And then what are some ways tomorrow that you might be able to incorporate oracy skills into enriching and ensuring students are practicing what it is you would like them to be practicing in the classroom?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. First and foremost, it's embarrassing to see myself on that video, but I wouldn't make it if I didn't think it was really helpful. I love using talk tasks in my classroom. So try it one more time. Instead of saying turn and talk, provide good language. We know that children will default to social language. We all do it as well. This applies to all of your children. Really good language supports and strong expectations for students to use academic language will result in students actually using academic language. So number one, thank you, Sarah. The second thing is we spent a lot of time, Sarah did a beautiful job talking about listening and speaking. Those are two domains that we often overlook in our classroom. We often skip to, well, my students need reading and writing support. speaking and listening are the foundation. So we spent a lot of time on that, and I'll go a little faster through reading and writing because truly listening and speaking are foundational. So try and get those right for us. Our English learners need that. And the other thing is listening and speaking are not just for your younger students. Listening and speaking skills need to be developed with your older students as well. So on that chart of language acquisition, it's not just your obvious English learners, it's your still English learners who've been here for 5 to 7 years who need to practice their listening and speaking skills. Let's bridge to reading right now. There are many ways to tackle reading with our English learners and our multilingual students, but I want to start with this idea of vocabulary. Vocabulary is the building block. Vocabulary is often an impediment to students actually comprehending what they're reading. So we need to practice words in order to build sentences, in order to build the building here, discourse, right? So a really kind of low-hanging fruit for your English learners is to make sure that they have the vocabulary when you are doing your reading to actually build a sentence, to understand the larger discourse of what they're reading, right? So don't underestimate vocabulary. Here's how we're going to look at vocabulary today. Again, we could do hours and hours on vocabulary, so send me an email. My email is on the packet. I would love to do nothing more than speak to you about building vocabulary with your English learners. One thing I want you to focus on today, though, is that not all vocabulary is created equally. Generally speaking, these set of researchers here have identified 3 tiers of vocabulary. So number 1, tier 1 words are words that are familiar in everyday speech. Tier 2 words are high frequency words. They can be found in many content areas. So this is the word hypotenuse, for example. You can see it in different content areas. Tier 3 words are low frequency words. They're very domain specific. This is the word plateau. Well, that's not true. That's a tier 2 word. Let's go with hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is a word that is very domain specific. Here's the thing. Your words in your glossary in the back of or in the sidebar of your text are going to focus on tier 3 words. Your English learners need to be taught tier 1 and tier 2 words. Don't overlook those words with your English learners. Those words often, tier 1 and tier 2, they make up the definitions of your tier 3 words. So when you look at your reading, here's what I do. I quickly glance at my reading for the day in any of my subjects, and I start with vocabulary. Number 1, I start with vocabulary in my own planning. I literally take a Post-it and I make 3 columns with 2 lines, making 3 columns, and I jot down, here's some tier 1 words, some tier 2 and some tier 3 words. And I make sure if Sarah's my English learner, I have a group of them, I meet with Sarah and I go over some of these words very quickly, because 1 or 2 words that are missing for an English learner in a reading or in a sentence can literally lead to a lack of comprehension. And I also front load these vocabulary. I start with them. I embed my words in a set of Google Slides with an image or maybe a video. We go over these, or I meet in small groups, or we make actions for these words at the very beginning of our lesson. This goes from pre-K through 12th grade. I start with vocabulary so I can open a file folder for my students. I think of our brain as being a series of file folders. I need to find the file and open it and embed images of, let's say we're talking about orchards, of apples and trees and of fall and of harvest. And then when I go to read my story about the orchard, my students have this file folder where they can map on their first language and they can map on what they already know. So do me a favor, go to your graphic organizer and in the reading section, jot down what you're going to do today in terms of front loading vocabulary and in terms of thinking about tiered vocabulary and just generally speaking, what it means to focus on vocabulary as a first bridge to strengthening reading. Take 30 seconds and unpause this, and we're going to talk about writing. All right, friends, writing. Writing is, and I don't mean to say the last thing we need to focus on with our English learners. Last is not an order of importance, but you need to know that students can't come to writing unless they have good listening, speaking, and reading skills. And when it comes to writing for our English learners, it's often the hardest thing to do in a second language. I know it's this way for me in Spanish, for example, because writing involves knowing spelling, knowing word order. Writing is much more concrete of an activity. If I am speaking to Sarah and she's not understanding me, I can in the moment negotiate my language. I can try again. I can use motions. Writing is much more finite. I make a commitment when I have to write something. Here are two different approaches to writing with our English learners. Number one, I want you to think about the fact that our English learners need to develop technical skills. They need you, even at the high school math level, if you're a high school math teacher, to focus on grammar, on punctuation. They need this kind of iterative editing process to make sure that they are getting better at their technical skills. So no matter what your grade level, you are a language teacher. I want you to say to yourself right now, I am a language teacher. Okay, say it again, even I can't hear you. I am a language teacher. So I want you to focus on parts of speech. I want you to focus on really helping our English learners hone their technical skills, just like in a soccer game, right? You need to be really good at the technical skills. And at the same time, the average soccer player runs an average of 4 to 6 miles per soccer game. So we actually need to be good at stamina. Research shows us that English learners are often asked to write significantly less in our classrooms than our traditional monolingual students. Our students literally need to build their writing muscles. So I also want you to build in writing activities that you're not going to grade, that you're not going to assess, in which your students feel very capable. Often these can be interpersonal journals. It can be a stop and jot. I just want you to think about how to incorporate writing multiple times a day so our students can become better writers, that they can develop their writing stamina. Take 10 seconds here and write down what you think about writing technical skills and about providing stamina opportunities for your learners. Take just one moment. Now that you're joining us again, these pauses can be awkward, but we're just owning them here. I want you to think about writing in this way. This is one of my favorite writing activities, and it involves a lot of domains. So what I call these word splashes. So research shows us that students who verbally process their thoughts before they write more in depth and better pieces, which would make sense. So if I said today, all right, friends, we're going to talk about the muscular system. We might get some good responses, but we're going to get better responses if we use this tool that I love called a word splash. And I make these on chart paper, or I just have them in Word and I can hand them out pretty frequently. In groups, there's your social piece of language, and there's your listening and your speaking. I want you to write down what are the parts of the muscular system that you know. Awesome. In this next bucket, I want you to use words that describe movement. So contract, expand, bend, right? Wait a minute. Think about what you're doing with parts of speech by doing this. You're actually honing in on parts of speech before you even realize it. Then I want you to name other objects in the muscular system. So these could be vessels or organs or whatever else may be in the muscular system, cells, right? Then I want you to use words to describe the muscular system. Is it interconnected? Is it interdependent? How does this relate to the body? Then once your students have the opportunity to put their words on paper in groups, then I guarantee you, if I say, and now I want you to write about the muscular system, you're going to get significantly deeper and more profound responses. So take just a moment and on your graphic organizer, write about how you might use something called a word splash in your classroom. All right, friends. So we promised you 5 strategies today. And here's the 5th one. Strategy 1 was based on strengthening listening skills. Strategy 2 was strengthening speaking skills. 3 was reading. 4 was writing. 5 is tying it all together. So what I want to do here is I just want to cover, these are some really profoundly research-based strategies for English learners. So if you want to close the learning gap, here are 9 things that you can do. And I'm literally going to read them to you. And I just want you to, in your graphic organizer, this is provided for you as well. I just want you to take some notes. More than taking notes. Thank you, Miss Sarah Arvana White. What I'd love for you to do is take this sheet and visit a teacher's classroom in your building, not to evaluate, but a formative learning experience. What do you see present? Number one, does a teacher show knowledge of the language levels of students? Good teachers of English learners know those language proficiency levels, and they adapt their instruction to meet those needs. The second piece, our content and language objectives are addressed, displayed, and assessed. Are you thinking not just about what content your students need, but what language they need to show you mastery? Send us an email and we'll send you all kinds of resources on developing language objectives. Number three, our visuals are used to support comprehension, comprehensible input. Are you using images, realia, real items, technology, actions, right? We talked about vocabulary and having rich actions. Are they there? Are you using all 4 domains of language in your lesson? Number 5, academic language is targeted and taught explicitly. That was vocabulary with an emphasis on tiered lexicon. There you go. There's your tiered vocabulary. Are you utilizing students' first language, either allowing them to speak in pairs, or is it at least a part of your conversation? Back to our very beginning key ideas. The stronger a student is in their first language, the stronger they're going to be in their second language. Is language scaffolded and supported with models? Think aloud. There you go. Written examples, references, word walls, sentence frames, word banks, talk tasks maybe, or songs. Is an effort made to build upon the background knowledge and cultural gifts of our students? Remember, language learners are superheroes and they come with many gifts and talents. And then finally, the assessments account for the can-do markers that was on your language acquisition chart. What can students do at each level of proficiency? Okay, so tie it all together. Take an honest assessment of how well you're doing these 9 particular things. We know you're great supporters of your English learners, and we know that you can do this. Thank you, Sarah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Katie. And thank you all for joining us today. So at the beginning, we shared with you our objectives for this session. And so we just want to revisit them as any good teacher, and just hopefully you can put a big old check mark next to them. And now with those 5 stages of second language acquisition, you're able to identify your multilingual learners. And then with that information and what Katie shared about the articulating not only the gains that occurred during COVID, but then able to understand the reasons why there might be a learning gap experienced by some of your English learners during the pandemic. And then last but not least, being able to integrate 5 strategies for strengthening instruction across the 4 domains specifically, and then tying it all together at the end. And so we just want to say thank you again for joining us, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of the presentations throughout this NCEA conference.
Thank you very much, friends. We're just an email away. Thank you. See you.